Hello, and welcome to the third edition of Artists About Artists, presented by Susan Eley Fine Art in New York City. I'm James Isherwood, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing artist Angela Acorn about her work. Angela's experience as an interior designer, along with her extensive travels around the world, inform her rich pastel paintings, collages, and three-dimensional paper sculptures. Today, we will explore her inspirations, motivations, and artistic practices to get a deeper understanding of how several bodies of work are realized. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, James, for what a lovely introduction. And thank you for having this conversation today. I'm looking forward to it.
It's my pleasure. Well, let's begin with you telling us a bit about your background and how you began your journey as an artist.
I think there are sort of two defining pieces about why I do what I do. One is when I first left college, I was very fortunate to get a job in an architectural practice as the interior designer. And so, you know, this enabled me just to play around with space and rooms. And it was just really the dream job for me. I felt very comfortable doing it. And the other piece is that I've moved a lot in my travels, and you know that involves the process of packing everything up that you own and then unpacking it in a new destination, even if it's in the same country or city, and kind of seeing all your objects and personal items as with new eyes, you know, sort of rediscovering things. And I think that is a lot of what my work is about. It's sort of defamiliarization, seeing things out of context. And that comes also from living in different countries, you know, particularly in Japan. You know, things were so alien. You know, quite often I didn't even know what something was, but I just loved it, you know. And so it is really, you know, making these discoveries and seeing things as if a lot of the time I didn't even know what it was. So it's really just seeing things with new eyes.
Curiosity.
Curiosity, yeah, yeah. You know, I work from that moment of inspiration where you see something, you think, what's that? You know, what is that doing? What's it for? What's its purpose? And I think also, you know, with the architectural piece, you know, I'm kind of just doing exactly the same thing now, except I'm doing that on paper.
And how did the works begin? Did they begin with looking at objects and seeing things, taking photographs, making sketches, combination of those things?
Yeah, it's really a combination of those things. That the initial motivation to pick up my sketchbook is really just glimpsing a moment, seeing something that takes my notice. I think of myself as a visual chronicler, you know, a writer, but I use images rather than writing. You know, that's what I'm doing. I'm noting what I see. So I'll never set up a still life by itself, but I'll take elements of things that I've seen. And sometimes that's at a friend's house, sometimes that's in a museum, sometimes that's at a restaurant. So it's coming from lots of different areas.
And your intuition?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I'm interested in, you know, how a plant leaf will cut across a jug or something like that, or the way two colors work together. That's what's really going on. I mean, I could even be walking down the street and I'll see two people in front of me wearing like a pink sweater and a red sweater, and I'll just, you know, capture that, Kodak that moment, thinking, you know, I just love those colors together. I've got to use them somewhere. And I'm sure a lot of that happens subconsciously as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. We're constantly aware of our surroundings and we're captured by those things. And then we think, how do we utilize this? How do we make this into our own narrative?
Yeah, and sometimes that's cognitive and sometimes it's not. And quite often I find that with a painting, you know, I'll do something, when I finish I'll sort of think, oh, okay, that's what I was thinking. You know, it sort of comes to me afterwards.
It takes time, right? It needs your mind digested, and then, you know, you're dealing with what finally came out on the paper.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
And it's exciting to realize those things once they're completed, and you think, how can I use this again? How can I change and make it better for myself?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because very often, you're working one painting, there's a particular area that's really resonating with you, and you're thinking, okay, that's my next painting. That's what I'm going to explore. And sometimes it's disappointing, but it's kind of a fun chase in a way. You're sort of starting with one idea, and then that follows on to another one. That can be explored in greater detail.
It's part of the process, that cross-pollination that we sometimes see without even realizing that things are there. And tell us a little bit about, are you inspired by other works that you've completed that are motivational in a formal sense, or is it a narrative sense, or both? Do they intermix as you start, let's say, mining from a finished work into a new work?
That's an interesting question. I don't think I ever do it from a finished piece. That kind of thought process comes during the painting. Although sometimes I'll have a painting up at home, and which is old. I mean, like a couple of years old, and I'll sort of see something new in it. You never quite know where it's going to come from or what the time frame for that is.
Excitement and pleasure at the same time.
Yeah. And, when I was talking to Chase the other week, his passion was so evident. And I think we all feel that euphoria when we're in the studio and something's really working and everything's aligned. And it's just, that's such an exciting feeling. It doesn't happen that often, but
that's the goal, though, right?
Yeah, that's the goal. Yeah.
Can we speak about Plant Table, which is the work behind you?
Yeah. This might be a good way to give some insight into the process. So, as I said before, I never actually set a still life up. Part of this, the plant, is actually taken from a sketch I did while I was staying in an Airbnb in Amsterdam. And it had this wonderful plant. It features a couple of times in other paintings as well. And then, so I have that from Amsterdam, which was from the sketch. And then the other pieces, jugs and glasses that I have from home. And, if you're familiar with my work, you'll see some of these items, objects sort of repeating themselves. And sometimes they change in scale, they change in color. They're really just a vehicle to find that sense of balance and order and sort of calm. So I'm not, even though I'm painting glasses and jugs, it's really the shape and form and color that's going on inside my head. And sometimes, I'll place a jug metaphorically on the paper, and then I'll put another plant in, and then I'll sort of feel it's not quite right, so I'll take the initial jug, just nudge it to the side or something. I can kind of move it along. So I really feel I'm sort of almost physically placing things on the page, and then they can move around at the same time. And I think, I love working in pastel because I love the immediacy of using pure pigmented color. And I also love the texture, it's getting one color peeping through a top color. I'm interested in that. And on the red glasses, I kind of like the way the background is a pale red and then there's a darker line on top of it. That just makes me excited. I don't know why, but I was really happy with those glasses.
Well, the contrast and the richness of color, and you're talking about how the pastel builds up on the tooth of the paper, and that's something that one can't see unless you're viewing the work in person to see the trueness and the powdery aspect of pastel, and how rich and vibrant these works are in person. And that softness combined with, what looks like a hard edge, you see how loose some of it can be. And, it's a very rich experience.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely.
Would you like to speak about these lovely Japanese interiors that are pastel works that are a bit new, I think, in the last 2 years, right? With interiors and some plant life.
Yeah, these are the latest work, really. They're very new. And in January this year, I was very fortunate, thanks to you for suggesting this, I applied for VCCA Virginia Creative Center of Arts residency. So I spent the whole of January down there, had a wonderful studio to myself, was able to immerse in my work, was surrounded by other writers, artists, musicians. It was incredibly enriching, fulfilling experience. And what I wanted to do is, I have my pastel work, and then more latterly I've been working in print studios and also papermaking. Papermaking is, when I was living in Japan, I became obsessed with paper. And when I came back to New York, signed up for a workshop at Giordani, the paper studio, and I have never looked back since. But printmaking and papermaking are, a very different process to pastel painting. There's a set of rules, there's a format that you have to sort of follow. And it's quite physical, and there's a sort of rhythm to the process as well. You're familiar with printing, there is a certain mechanical process that is involved, as with papermaking. And ironically, with those two more structured work processes, I feel my work became freer. Maybe it took the thinking part of the brain out of it. For example, I was able to experiment with some of the wonderful narratives that I'm drawn to on blue and white ceramics, both from Amsterdam and the East as well, and the correlate, the sort of conversation they had back and forth between East and West ceramics. And, even as a small child, I was just fascinated by those Japanese narratives on ceramics. I just sort of got lost in that otherworldliness. So back to Virginia, this wonderful studio, I really wanted to try and explore a way to get that lovely free form of working from the paper making and the print making, and fuse that, or find a way to work that into the pastels as well. And so these particular pieces were sketches that I did in the Museum of Modern Design in Ghent, in Belgium. And they're these wonderful 18th century mansion houses. So it's actually a new architectural piece as well, but I was walking through this 18th century mansion, with these sort of 10, 12 feet portraits of whomever, dignitaries. And they just kind of blew my mind away. Who gets a portrait done that big, But within that, I love the way that painting was hanging in a room and really took up one wall of a room. And then seeing the doors beyond that room opening up into other rooms and, kind of inviting you to explore, what's in the next room.
The power of that, the magnetism of it.
Yes, yeah. And then within that, as you're walking through these wonderful palatial rooms, there are glass cases with blue and white ceramics. So you're stopping and looking at that. So really the background of painting is really this image of a room with this portrait. And then I've kind of superimposed on the top some of the details of the narrative ceramics. And I really felt this was a pivotal piece for me. And I was able to fuse those two elements together and then also give it this kind of fantasy, more imaginary feel to it, which is what I feel from looking at these ceramics, these funny little worlds with fishing men on bridges and, sort of magical mountains that you're not quite sure they've, become clouds.
Right.
And the beautiful decorative trees.
The work is very ethereal with the angled portrait on the wall. It's very subtle. It's one of the later aspects of the work that you get to because you're immediately struck by this beautiful ultramarine blue tree. And then the viewer goes through the back of this work down the hallway. And then you circle us back to that portrait on the left, which is so elegant and subtle. And the way the composition is, your eye keeps roving, clockwise and counterclockwise. And it's quite ethereal. It's magical.
Yeah.
Unusual for your work in this sort of dark background and everything is popping up.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's interesting what you say about circling around the painting. I hadn't thought about that. And I like the way the stream comes through too, and then the birds as well.
There's also this other lovely collage work, which is a work on paper that's smaller, that has a Japanese bridge and trees that are superimposed. Can you speak about that work?
Yeah, just as an aside, I'm very excited that's been just chosen for a show down in New Jersey, Works on Paper, and Sarah Suzuki, the curator of drawings and prints at POMA, is curating the show. So I'm very excited about that. This is a piece about, we've done in sort of two stages. So the initial piece is handmade paper, and I've cut up an old kimono, which I've shaped into arches. I was on a long train journey from Tokyo down to Hiroshima, and you have the rhythm of the train, and I'm looking out over a very foreign landscape to what I'm used to seeing. I think everybody should take a train journey in a new country, because that's when you really get to see it. And I just had this lovely sense of these fields of arches, and they were sort of repeating and resonating with the rhythm of the train. And then the piece that's superimposed on top, again, is something I've taken from a ceramic narrative. And I felt it was just about being outside and inside. And a lot of my work is about, our inner self and how we project our outer self. And with the walking through museums piece, I'm trying to describe, paint, express the experience rather than just drawing what I see. So, for example, going back to the museums, I'm trying to experience what I felt when I was walking through that museum, seeing these wonderful rooms, and then seeing, focusing on the big picture, and then focusing in on these lovely little glass cabinets of, wacky men on horses. And you think about the artisans that made those, and how amazing they were, and that they had the time to make a whole ship out of clay and then decorate it beautifully. But it is both of these pieces, the last piece, the museum piece, and this Field of Arches, are more about the experience and that sort of inner monologue.
I think they're very clear and successful at that, because they evoke this magic time both within yourself, and you're exploring something that you've been to before, let's say the viewer, and that excitement is sort of quieted down, and it allows you to contemplate the work and to think more about how important spaces are to us and things in them.
Yeah, and I think that's something that started to happen with my work as well, like a zoom lens. I've been focusing on the still life table, and now I feel I'm putting that table in the context of a room, and putting some 3D structure around that has been in the past a sort of flattened surface. So I'm really excited about that, and I really feel that the two main pieces that came out of VCCA have been quite pivotal in, moving forward. And it was just a great experience, and I just feel very grateful to have had that time to really.
It's very motivational, you get to plan what's going to happen next, and that's what we're always looking forward to.
Yeah. And just having that new moment of inspiration and thinking, oh, wow, okay, that's got me, I want to do that.
Because you need to be challenged, you need to push the envelope of your craft, and, that's what just makes us richer people, intellectually and emotionally. Can we seg into the three-dimensional paper works that are sort of based on porcelain, which are so exquisite and delicate and so finely crafted? They're, in looking at a photograph of them versus seeing them in person, you think that they are porcelain. And then when you see them in person, you also think that they're porcelain, because they're so very thin. Tell us more about them. They are so beautiful.
Thank you for that lovely description. On the practical side, we're making paper. One of the processes is that you can actually use abaca paper, which has quite a flexible quality to it. You can use this to put around forms. And because, you know, I'm so attracted to pots, objects, you know, it kind of made, it was like a natural progression to start making my own. It's almost as if they've started to pop off the page. But more than that, it's interesting you use the word fragile because they do look very fragile, but they're actually really robust. You know, the paper is pretty strong. And that's something in my work that is a very important piece as well, that, you know, and again, it's a metaphor reflection on life, that, you know, life is so fragile, you know, as we've all been experiencing at the moment. But, you know, we're so strong as well. And I enjoy playing with that idea as well. And to continue that, you know, the paper that I put inside the pots is different to the paper that goes around the outside of the pots. And again, that was more about, you know, who we are inside and how we present to the rest of the world. And then also putting those pots, individual pots, into the context of a group. And, you know, and then you start to see those lovely shapes play against one another. And, you know, much as I do in the pastel paintings, you're looking at the negative shapes almost more than the positive shapes.
Right.
And the interplay between them.
In your recent show at Susan Eley Fine Art, you had dozens of these paper sculptures, and were they set up beforehand as groupings before they were put together in the gallery for the show, or were they realized as groupings specifically before the show, or did you mix and match them to for the exhibition itself?
That's a good question. Some of them, some pots you know, some better than others, and I had put those in groups already. I have to say it was Emily in the gallery that really was the one that put that together and did an amazing job.
An outside eye most of the time, you know, because we're so close to work.
Yes, exactly. I needed to hand it over to someone else, and she did such a wonderful job. I mean, the only thing I had an idea with was, because in the gallery there are so many screws in that wonderful brick wall. You know, I had this idea, which I'd sort of done with the kids project before, to use little very strong magnets, and so we were able to suspend some of those pots directly onto the brick wall, which I think was really nice. I mean, I was really happy with the way they had a conversation with the pieces in the paintings as well. You know,
and it was magic. It was a different kind of magic.
Thank you. Yeah. So I feel that was really, really great. But honestly, it was Emily that made them really work. Yeah.
Well, it's a nice collaboration in that way.
Yeah.
What about new work in the sense of, with what you've learned at the recent residency, what's next for you, Angela?
Well, I think going back to about, you know, stepping back, zooming out from the flattened table, I really am interested in having a more three-dimensional feel to the pastel paintings as well, and also trying to continue to have that sort of sense of the unworldly floating across, you know, the more structured image, and just mixing that up a bit, you know. That's I think that's where it's moving at the moment. You know, that's what I'm trying to work on. But it's hard, as you know, starting to work in a new direction is really hard. But as you say, that's how we grow, and that's, you know, it's very necessary.
And the excitement is good. You know, I love seeing those pictures within pictures in some of the recent very works that you've made on pastel. And, you know, you can just see that you're happy. You can see it in the work. And, you know, that in itself can be the motivation for a long period of time.
Yeah. And I think color comes into a lot of that. Color makes me happy, you know, when you suddenly get like two colors vibrating, you know, making your eyes wobble. I don't need anything else. That makes me happy.
Well, you know, you're doing your work.
Yeah. That's
you make yourself happy. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do as an artist.
Yeah. And you know, thank you so much, James, for interviewing me.
My pleasure.
As you know, I just love your work. So felt very good to be interviewed by you.
Well, I was just excited to be able to, you know, speak about your work in a very different context and a different medium, and to understand more about the things that I'm looking at.
Is there anything that I've said that surprises you at all? Or?
No, I think your thought process is very methodical and logical, and then there's a certain aspect that we all take of risk taking, and I think it's important to have that will to fail as well, because it teaches us how do we solve this problem, or we try to do the opposite, and sometimes that works as a strategy. We have to employ so many different strategies to make the work that we want to make, even if it means destroying something. You know?
And learning to live.
You're a very concise person. You might not feel that way. I think we all, we come, as you were saying about inner and outer perception, sometimes we come across one way, and, you know, our thoughts are contradictory as artists because we're trying to find different answers. And that's half of why we do it. We're trying to communicate as best we can.
And I think we have to be, you know, when we're doing that, I find if I start worrying about the onlooker, or, you know, how I feel something should or shouldn't look, that's when it goes wrong. You know, I have to be true to myself, you know, which also involves, you know, as you say, discarding pieces of work, which you sometimes come back to. But I do think that you absolutely, that's something I've learned more recently, is you have to be true to yourself and what you're doing, and be authentic in what you're trying to say, and not say it for anyone else, really. Not try and say it what you perceive possibly other people might want to hear, but we'll see. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does make sense, because you can't, one never knows if you have the pleasure of being in the presence of your viewer at the same time looking at the work, you never know what they're going to say about it. That can be just as eye-opening as you find out about the meaning of a work months or years after it's been completed. It's sort of it's the same new experience of, wow, I never thought of that.
And that's kind of cool, you know, because, you know, everyone interprets everything so differently, and I love that. It's very exciting.
We're fortunate.
Lucky, we are so lucky.
Seems like a good spot to end.
That's great. Thank you so much, James, and thank you, Susan, for sponsoring us all. And
bye-bye.
Bye.